Hey team, thanks for jumping on, and for those not on live, I'm sure you're going to really enjoy this next little bit of time with Kat. I've known Kat for, I want to say, I think we've worked together for 17 years, Kat, 18 years, something like
Wow,
that.
that's scary.
And 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 when we started working together, Kat was sort of part-time with the All Blacks. Had been with the All Blacks before on various sort of roles that were again part-time and intermittent. And as I suppose nutrition's become, um, I suppose people have realised the absolute value of nutrition on performance. Cat's
Mm.
become full-time, fully assembled with the team, 24/7, because you would have heard me mention it many a times, and Kat and I always joke about it, but the performance of an athlete, or the condition of an athlete, um, you know, we'd like to say, us S&C coaches, that it's, you know, 80% fitness and 20% nutrition. But I think at the end of the day, it's probably more like 70% nutrition and 30% training. The training's pretty easy to do. It's not that complicated. But the
Mm.
if you don't get nutrition right, you don't realize any of the hard work or any of the gains from the hard work. So Kat's a massive part of the All Black machine, and has been doing an awesome job and continues to do an awesome job. So we're really, really lucky to have her here. Um, I think Kat's going to just talk about general performance nutrition, and then as Kat's chatting, then Kat, I'm sure you wouldn't mind questions along the way, but there'll also be an opportunity for some questions at the end. So during or after is fine, and just take this as a great opportunity to learn from one of the most experienced nutritionists around the world. So, yeah, thanks for giving us your time, Kat. You're awesome.
Oh, Gilly, it's lovely to be here, and it's always exciting to be able to sort of share the love. And as I say, Gilly and I have worked together for a long time, and he's been a massive part in my direction in terms of where I've taken nutrition as well, and just a really awesome relationship of working nutrition and S&C together, I guess. And yeah, we have a lot of fun. It's really cool, and it's really nice to see what Gilly's doing behind the scenes as well, helping out with you guys too. So I'm really lucky to be able to come in here and meet with you guys and share some of the things that we've done over the years and what's worked and what hasn't. So we'll move on, shall we, Gilly? Shall I attempt to share my screen, I guess?
You attempt, Kat. You attempt.
Let's see how we go. Okay. What can you see?
Oh, yeah, there we go.
Here we go. No,
I can
it's not the.
see a green screen.
Yeah, hang on. Just let me see what's happening here. Sorry. What's happening? Okay, let's try again. Right. Share screen. This one don't.
Boom.
So we'll bring that up.
Yep. And if you just go to slideshow, Kat, you'll be away
We're all
laughing.
good to go. Yeah. Oh, why is it doing that? Sorry. It's there to go. Oh, hang on. What I'll do is this first, perhaps. No. Sorry, team. I'm just not quite sure why it keeps flicking to the other slide.
You should be able to just arrow back to where you want to go to, though, Kat, I think.
Yeah. Well, I was trying that, and that was the share. Right. Okay, let's try this again. I'm sharing that one. So that there, so that should, when I go there. Ah, here we go. But it's when I click it. One next one, we'll see what happens. Okay, so there's two of our rugby greats to start with. Amazing people to work with. And these two people really embraced the role of nutrition, obviously because they're bigger men, but also they had really long-lasting careers. And Gilly will certainly reinforce the impact that these people had on not only our team, but the role of the S&C and nutrition and career in their career as well. So I think the thing to think about first is, as Gilly's already alluded to, is why nutrition for rugby, why is it so important? And it was certainly something in my career when I started off 2 days a week and then became over sort of 5 or 6 years became full-time, was really embracing why nutrition was just so important for the role of these rugby players. And I think it's important to think about the purpose of what these guys are doing from your viewpoint. And I'm certainly no professional in this area, so I'm just really touching on it. But the purpose of training is really to create an adaptation. And we've got players who are going to deliver training loads so that they can win games in the weekend. Essentially, that's what we're trying to do. So in rugby, that means stronger, faster, more powerful, explosive on the ground and the air, endurance, reactions, and obviously the ability to be able to endure contact. And I guess that's what sets rugby aside from so many of the different sports that we have that we can work with, is that physical contact that they have to endure day after day. So when we look at nutrition, what does that then mean? So for me, performance nutrition is the art of making food choices that maximize these adaptations. Okay, and I'll come back to that in a little bit too. But so we want better fueling and fatigue, greater recovery, sustained concentration and cognition, really, really important, and also obviously optimal physical and mental health. So that's what we're embracing so that we get these adaptations, so that then the work that you do is going to be maximized with these players and we're going to get the best out of them and obviously being able to compete at the level that they want to be. And I think the other thing to understand is that research has shown us that if we get nutrition right in the early days, it can actually extend a person's career by 3 to 6 years. So for us on a professional level, that's gold, because that's, value for money. That's a massive investment. So, we've got players now, I think, Gilly, when we first came in, players were really sort of only getting into early 30s and retiring or moving on, whereas now we've got players into their mid-30s, even some coming back in their late 30s, not particularly at all Black level, but who've been able to sustain a level of rugby well into their 30s. And for the wonderful work that Gilly does, and also being able to eat well and eating well early on, can make such a difference to the athletes that we're producing. And so I guess that's where our role is for you guys, as well as to be able to help your athletes get the best out of what they're doing every day. First, I just want to recap on what we're actually feeding, because often when we think about nutrition, we purely just think about the training. And so what I want you to understand first is that every player or every athlete that you see brings a different set of genes to the table. So everyone's different. So what I need, what Gilly needs, what your prop, your Lucy, your hooker, whatever, regardless of that, their genetic background is going to be completely different. And so we really have to be able to embrace that. And I guess for us, having to learn about the different cultures that we have in our environment as well, makes it just that little bit more challenging around what is the best nutrition for them. And I don't think we've completely nailed that yet, but we're certainly learning more and more as we go along. The other thing to understand is that nutrition changes over periods of time as we evolve as humans, as we grow older. And a classic example for that is when you've got your 18-year-old coming in versus 34-year-old. Now, Sam Whitelock is a great example of this. When he came into our environment, he literally had to eat food all the time. Every time I looked at him, he'd go, "Kat, I've got food," because he literally could not keep his weight on. By the time he was 34 and in his last year, he was literally down a day in just small snacks just to maintain the same mass. And that's probably been one of the big learnings we've seen over the period of time where the players are staying in longer with us, is that when they get into their late 20s, early 30s, they actually start to build quite a lot more, will make it's easier for them to build more muscle. And so nutrition actually evolves every year. So what an athlete did last year or a player did last year is not always going to work for them this year. And you've got injuries and things like that involved if they've had any time out as well, which is again going to change their needs. So never think that nutrition has reached its point where that player knows what they're doing, because it keeps having to evolve. And that's with time and place. And as I say, I'm sure all of you, as you're getting older, you're understanding that your nutrition changes too. So nutrition is never static, and that's what makes it so exciting, is that it's always evolving. The other thing that rugby is unique is that we have so many different positions that have different physical attributes. And this is a classic example here of a Sam Whitelock versus an Aaron Smith, or a lock versus a nine. So genetically completely different, physically very different. Does that mean their nutrition is very different? And obviously their individual likes and dislikes determine that as well. But definitely two very good examples of how different nutrition can be, and that there is just no one type that fits all. The other thing to understand is that your rugby players in particular, or the athletes you're working with, unless they're professional, they've got a whole lot of other things happening in their lives. So this is what we call NEAT, or the non-exercise activity, the calories or energy that's used to do all the other things in life. So there'll be lots of times they've got meetings, they'll have families and life stresses that are going on at home. Some of them will be working or carrying on part-time jobs, or trying to run a business in the background. And then there'll be those that also the leisurely activities that carry on to help sort of balance out the impact of having a lot of other sport and intensities in your life. So we cannot take these out of the equation. They're really important to the nutritional needs of that athlete, but also helping you with timings and looking at their lifestyle and how that fits in around their nutrition. The other thing is the brain is so critical to nutrition support, because not only in obviously our daily living, but also helping to preserve it for a lifelong of high functioning brain. And also just in sport, the ability for cognitive function, reactions, etc. And so we can't underestimate also the impact that the brain has on things like energy levels, our mood, our hormones, our reactions, and our quality of life. So when we think of nutrition, we must think of it not only from a physical viewpoint, but how it affects the mental and emotional performance of your athlete. So every day, what you eat the day before has an impact on how you turn up, not only to train, but the motivation, your ability to learn, your reaction and interaction with other people, all is affected by the nutrition that you've been using over the day or the week or the months previous to that. So really important to consider that factor. So you can see that eating well for rugby is actually really critical when you have to factor in. So players must make sure they're meeting the needs of training, the non-exercise activities outside of what they're doing around that training, the brain, a balanced mood, also sleep, which I'll touch on a bit later, and obviously then your physical health. So health means your physical, your mental, and your well-being. So these are all the things that we're having to consider when we're looking at nutrition for an athlete. Has anyone got any questions at this point that they would like to ask about before we sort of move on to more practical? Super, great. So I guess my whole ethos is, as I mentioned, nutrition is absolutely an art, and even your S&C area, the art or craft, but my whole ethos is around real food. So the more we can encourage our athletes to eat real food, the more nutrients and the more impact that food is going to have on all those attributes we talked about earlier. And it absolutely is an art. You can have all the knowledge in the world, but the craft and the art is actually being able to make that food work for that individual athlete. And so sometimes it's really simple things like, eating a solid breakfast that's going to get you through the day. I mean, sometimes we think we have all this amazing knowledge, but actually the simple tasks that we're asking of our athlete can actually seem really minuscule, but actually they're going to have a massive impact. So it is actually an art rather than just straight theory around what you're trying to do. And to remember that real food is actually your body's currency. That is what it understands. A whole lot of the processed or fast foods Yes, it sort of knows what to do with it. It tries to do the best that it can. But if you're wanting absolute bang for buck and a body that really understands the nutrition that it's getting, you've got to use real food. And I appreciate that in this time of life that we're in, or the stages of the way we live our lives, that can actually be really difficult if you only got to look at people's trolleys in the supermarket to look at the fact that a lot of them are not actually using real food to fuel themselves. So again, just helping your athletes understand and giving them resources that will really help maximize and help them eat that real food. So let's touch on, I guess, the role of food in performance. And the number one thing is we want energy, don't we? We all know what it feels like. It's probably me last week when I felt ill, tired, no energy in the battery. We want a fully charged battery. So how do we know that we're making that happen? What are the things that we can do to make sure that each time your athlete wakes up in the morning, they're ready and charged, ready to go? So the obvious one that we think about is our carbohydrate fuse. These are what keep your body fueled. And there's a lot of controversy around carbohydrates, but when it comes to rugby players, this is what makes the difference in terms of the energy that they're going to use when they turn up to training. The big thing is actually understanding the carbohydrate foods that we're using. And so when I talk about real food, this is what we're meaning. So things like your grainy breads, all your beautiful fruit and vegetables, your dairy products, your nuts and seeds, your grains, your legumes, your brown rice, and then your starchy vegetables like your kumara, your taros, your yams, your carrots, your peas, that sort of thing can be a little bit more carby as well. So these foods should form the basis of all meals. And I'll come back a little bit later and talk about sort of how much you're looking at and portions on plates. But this is the primary basis of what most athletes, remember, it's all about working out what that looks like for your individual athlete and the day of the week as well. But if you're getting most of these carb foods in your diet, then you're also going to be getting a whole lot of nutrients as well. So the thing that we also get confused about when we talk about carbs is that sugar is actually a carb as well. Does anyone know the difference between eating sugar versus eating any of those real foods that we talked about on that previous slide?
Come on, team.
Oh, doesn't sugar just give you like a shorter burst of higher energy, and then you kind of just crash a bit? You
Beautiful.
might feel
Yep.
good for you might feel good for short term, but then you don't have anything to sort of sustain yourself.
Yeah. Yep. Good point. That's one good point. There's another one as
So
well.
sugar spikes the insulin very quickly.
Sorry, what was that?
The sugar spikes the insulin quickly because it releases very quickly, and it's more processed as well compared to the other carbs sources which you mentioned before.
Absolutely. So the second part, sorry.
And this is more inflammatory as well for the body.
Yeah. So the key thing you said there was the second one is processed. So sugar contains absolutely no vitamins and minerals at all. Whereas all those lovely carb foods we had in that first slide are absolutely loaded with antioxidants, all your vitamins, all your minerals, all the foods that are, like you say, anti-inflammatory, all the foods that are actually going to sustain and help an athlete. Sugar actually offers nothing other than a quick fix. So when do you see...
It tastes good, though.
It tastes damn good. When do you think you could see an opportunity to use a quick fix sugar type food in an athlete's diet?
Ma'am, if someone's blood pressure went quickly low, then this quick fix might be helps to regain that blood sugar level.
Blood sugar level, yep, nice.
Do you have if you have back-to-back trainings and you don't have enough time to eat?
Yeah. Absolutely. So you've nailed it on the head there, is that it actually can be a convenience food. So for example, this is why we've designed sports drinks. This is why we've designed like squeezy gels, because they provide an advantage of providing a quick fix of sugar or carbohydrate or glucose into the system so that you're not having to chew a whole lot of food and take time. It doesn't take bulk in your tummy, and you're going to get a result that's very, very quick. And obviously, you know, if it's in the middle of the game, you don't often have time. But I do have players who will eat bananas instead of having a sugar fix or a gel. But that's the case in point for when you can use those types of foods. Outside of preparing for a game or a competition, those foods actually have no benefit to us. And you see, I always giggle, I'm sure some of you have kids or getting to a point where you have kids where I've seen parents turn up with big bowls of Powerade because their kids are running a 5-minute cross country and they're going to need a sugar fix. And it's just really sort of taken out of context. But again, that's encouraging people to use sugar as this quick fix. And so we've also got to make sure that we're not always seeing it as a quick fix that we often do. We think, oh shit, I'm really hungry, I need something quick. Grab a can of Coke or a fizzy drink, a juice, a bag of lollies. And absolutely, as you mentioned, that gives you a quick fix. And I'll show you soon that then you get that bounce back down and you're still hungry again and you actually haven't cured what you had 30 minutes ago. So just to point out that all these foods on the slide here also act like a sugar. So your fizzy drinks, all your sorts of basically processed high carb foods that we see. And so what you'll find is you can see on the graph on the left there, which this is what we call a high glycemic, or high glycemic is a food that's absorbed very, very quickly. So within 20 minutes, 15, 20 minutes, the carbs in that food is available as glucose in your bloodstream. Absorb very, very quickly. The body produces insulin because we can actually only have about a teaspoon of sugar circulating our system at any one time. And so the body's very, very sensitive to that, releases insulin and brings the blood sugars back down by drawing the glucose into the organs or into the muscles. And so that can sometimes be some people's day. High carb, quickly release, boom, get a fix, back down, hungry again, boom, 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 boom goes the day. What we now know, and we've known for some time, that those very nutritious carbohydrates I showed you at the beginning actually take 3 to 4 hours to break down and digest. And so they're what's called low glycemic. So their blood sugars, it's almost like having a backpack on your back where they literally release slow carbs over the next 2 or 3 hours. So you get a sustained release where you feel energized for longer, you don't get the crash, you can make really good food choices because you're not in that craving, hunger, I need sugar type fix. And so what we need to try and encourage people to do is to make sure that the majority of their meals are those slow release carbohydrates that are not only giving us long sustained energy, feel fuller for longer, but also a massive array of vitamins and minerals. Okay, so they're really giving you bang for buck. Okay. And so classic examples of this, you know, back in the day when some of you may still be eating Cocoa Pops and cornflakes for breakfast, is that you have your bowl of Cocoa Pops and cornflakes for breakfast. You had a bit of milk that's a low GI, but it's not quite enough to sustain you. And lo and behold, this was me. An hour later, I'm hungry. So you're looking for the toast, you're looking for another bowl, you know, and so you're constantly looking for food. And this is where people get caught up in that whole concept of carb foods being bad for them, because this is the focus of the foods that they're using. So we need to try and go back to the more natural, unprocessed carbohydrates that are real food that sustain and support us over the course of time. That chart on the left, though, if you're thinking of sporting performance, actually can help you because it's giving you that fast, quick. I mean, at the start of a game, you're not wanting to have a bowl of rolled oats that's going to sustain you and fill up your tummy and only release small amounts over the next 2 or 3 hours. Great at a pre-match meal, but if it's 20 minutes to go, probably not ideal. That's where you're wanting more of the quick fix, because as soon as you start exercising, it'll start using up those carbs as well. And that's why we have gels. And in fact, you know, the tradition is only to have gels at half time. I've had real success with players using them every 20 minutes in a game just to keep sustaining them. And they will feel that hit come on and really sustain. So at 20, 40 and 60 minutes during a game, that can have quite an impact of having a gel in particular that can give you those hits over that course and period of time. Any questions around what I've just covered there?
Hey, Kat, we just had a good one in the chat box from Andy. Is the down after a short-term sugar hit worse for performance in the longer term? I.e.,
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, and for some people they can be, and we've put blood glucose monitors on players, and that low can also happen after a training where glucose is still in the bloodstream because it's been generated out for use for the muscle, and then they eat something, they get an overpower of insulin, and if you don't have enough carbs, that can drop really low. And I've had players with tremors and feeling quite unwell and really lightheaded. And so some people can be very, very sensitive to those lows.
Okay, that's good to know. And Brian just popped in. Would honey and bananas be high or low on the glycemic index? Would they be like quick sugars?
Yeah, look, honestly, if you go in and look up some like low glycemic charts, you can easily Google all those and see the different foods. They tend to, what's interesting is some, and this is what we found with the blood glucose monitors, is some people, what is a low GI for one person might not necessarily be a low GI for another person. Honey and bananas generally are lower at the end of the scale versus a simple sugar food like a gel. But again, it depends how much you have. So if you have a big load of that, then it's going to produce a higher response. So it's again working out, and that's why it has been gold working with some blood glucose monitors. You can actually see the responses that people are getting to foods as well. But it is a matter of trial and error and working out what works best for each individual person. But honey has not been seen really as a short, quick fix performance enhancing because it is more of a lower GI because it's got fructose in it.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, so let's move on to the lovely group that all rugby players love and could easily make this part of their only food that they eat, and that is protein. And look, we're all very aware of the studies and the research around protein to support muscle development, muscle recovery, muscle gain. And so really it's just a matter of understanding and getting back to using good basic foods that you can use that are easy to cook up, relatively cheapish, but understanding that we can get protein from non-animal food sources that can actually top up your protein. So nuts and seeds, your nut butters, legumes are really good as well. So don't negate those as not being options to the protein. And I think the key thing around protein is not just having massive feeds 3 times a day. What we've not shown is that we call them, and I'm sure you're all aware of protein pulses. So actually the effect of protein on muscle recovery and regrowth only lasts for about 2 or 3 hours. And so you're better to actually have 30 or 40 grams every 3 hours than having 70 or 80 grams 3 times a day. And that's actually something that many athletes struggle with because it's quite hard to get high protein snacks in between that meet those pulses. And I guess that's a really good reason to reinforce whey protein that you can use in a shake, particularly with someone who's training hard or needs to keep weight up, that a whey protein in between meals can be a really effective way of meeting that pulse, and also the leucine of 3 to 5 grams that you need to help with that muscle recovery. And look, there's a lot of studies on all the different types of proteins and the way that they affect muscle. And whey protein still seems to come out as your sort of gold standard. There are some different combinations out there that people can try. Obviously, for people, there's a lot more people who are lactose-free or dairy-free, so there are often a lot more pea proteins or different non-dairy proteins out there trying to match the leucine and the effect on the muscle. And there's some that are getting quite close, so it's just keeping an eye out for those that are there. And then the other thing is around the role of protein in the evening, and they've found that having something before you go to bed can really help with that recovery overnight. And what is interesting actually is if you've got players trying to put on muscle mass, intermittent fasting or periods of time without food actually works against trying to put on muscle, because the more regularly you eat, the more stimulation of growth hormone that you have. And they found that people who didn't eat for 12 hours or 14 hours overnight less muscle growth versus those that had the protein in the evening to try and boost that. We tend to think about more of a casein-based protein because sometimes whey protein can keep people awake, but casein is a bit more expensive and players don't tend to really like it as much. But if you have a problem with whey keeping awake, then casein protein-based is definitely more of a slow release and a better option there. Any questions around protein?
What
Cool.
kind of
Okay.
products would casein come in? Because
It's
I'm
actually
pretty
not
familiar with.
So
Also, because I'm pretty, I guess most people are familiar with whey and all that, but casein, like, where would you tend to find that? Like, like what's a popular kind of product or brand people would get?
yeah, that's a really good question. It's actually really hard to get. It's most night proteins will have a fairly substantial amount of casein. And so, but not a lot of companies have stopped making it because it hasn't been as popular. It's quite hard to get, but if you can find a night protein, and this is why people will see if you add milk to it, so milk has more casein in it. And so that's more of a slow release type protein as well. But
I think
you just have to keep your eye out for it.
Yeah, sorry, Kat, to interrupt. Dan, I think if you look at most proteins, like the a lot are protein or whey blends. So we have whey protein concentrate, you have whey protein isolate, and then you have casein, and a lot of them will be blends. But yeah, the nighttime has a lot more in it, Kat, and a lot of the blends will have casein in it. But yeah, the isolates are sort of probably one extreme, and then the slower releases, the blends or the nighttime, which is casein based.
Yeah, and again, in most companies, it's all about what they can sell and popularity. So it is quite hard to get the casein based option, but it certainly works better on the research.
And what is the recommendation? Oh, okay.
Yeah, carry on.
Oh, ma'am, what is the recommendation for the protein intake per kilogram especially for the athletes?
Right, I'm going to cover that. Yeah, so what we've found with rugby players, it's somewhere between 2 to 3 grams per kilo of body weight, usually up closer to the 3. But again, depending on their individual needs and what their outcome is with the role of protein, but somewhere around the 2 to 3 grams per kilo of body weight is what you're looking at. And so, as I say, it's going back to the point of not making it just 3 meals. It has to be staggered over the course of the day to get the maximum benefit from it there. Okay, so when I first started out in nutrition, in sports nutrition, fat was almost like a swear word. It was like everyone was trying to get rid of every ounce of fat, basically, because it was seen as part of body weight issues, negated performance because we're trying to maximize massive amounts of carbohydrates. And so originally when we thought of fats as well, we thought of fats as being part of these sorts of foods, our takeaways, our junky food, the foods that we love to taste and love to like. And companies are very, very good. There's, I don't know if you've ever heard, there's a sweet spot, and it's the combination of fat, sugar, and salt that you cannot turn down, that the human brain gets fixated with. It does not occur in any natural food. It is only in processed foods. And so companies will try and get as close to the sweet spot that they can to encourage you to want to eat more and more. And so by human nature, we sometimes crave these foods. And actually processed foods is actually now relegated as an addiction. Because for some people who love these sorts of foods and that sweet spot is really prevalent, it's very hard to give up. So what we did find out over time, though, is that we were actually missing some of the really good fats that were actually critical to our diet. And so we've come a long way in the role of fat in not only health, but athletic performance. So fats are absolutely critical, these good fats, for the role of all our fat-soluble vitamins, A, D, E, and K, for their role of omega-3s, for their polyunsaturated, monounsaturated. So your olive oils, your avocados, your walnuts, all your nut butters, your olives. And in New Zealand, we're really lucky that most of our meats are grass-fed. And so they produce better profiles of omega-3s and the good fats than grain-fed that a lot of the meats that we get from overseas are. So we're really lucky to that degree that we have good access. And so really every time you're eating, you should be including some form of good fat. So it might be avocado with your eggs for breakfast. It might be handfuls of nuts. It might for a snack. Obviously your meats speak for themselves, so mixing those up. Dairy products added in during the day, and then your nut butters on crackers, or hummus is really good as an option there because it's got your legumes and oils. And actually what they've found now, the olive oil in particular, not only for heart health, but is absolutely critical for brain health. And they're suggesting at least 1 tablespoon, if not 2 tablespoons of olive oil a day is really enhancing for long-term brain health. So some really good reasons to include good fats in our diet. I would say this is probably, other than the actual meats, the added good fats are really probably the hardest thing to get into an athlete's diet, because sometimes they are quite expensive. I mean, we all know how expensive olive oil is at the moment. Gilly stopped growing avocados, so the price has dropped a wee bit there because he charged a lot for them. We're waiting him to grow olives now, so that we get a good supply of olive oil. So this is really tough to get in. It's easy in my All Black environment because I have a relatively good budget, and on buffets you'll always find avocado, you'll always find bowls of nuts and seeds. There's always different types of peanut butter, almond butter. We've got jugs of the different types of oils, and obviously the milk and dairy products, and that are always available. We always have olives as well. And so I use our food in the All Black environment to help educate players of what they should be doing at home. Because sometimes, particularly with athletes, the show and tell, as you all know, can work a lot better in terms of behavior modification than actually telling and trying to explain. Whereas if you've got an objective that gives an example. And what was interesting, a few players last year, when we added some nuts and seeds and more oils into their diet, they actually found their bowels were working a lot better as well. So it's always a good question to ask, and I'll move on to that in a minute around gut health and bowel health as well. Any questions around the good fats there?
Just to quickly circle back on the protein, Kat, Andy asked for protein per body weight, grams per kilo. For young athletes, is that for their target body weight or their current body weight?
It's a very good question. Usually it's for their target body weight.
Okay,
But
cool.
But it depends. Like if you're looking for 10, like I'm talking 5 kilo increments here, so you'd only add on for 5 kilos. You wouldn't want to add on for 10 kilos. And when you're putting on mass gain, you just want to take it in small increments. So if you added 5 kilos as your body weight, then that would be a good start.
So sorry, just to jump in there. So you're kind of looking at probably a year-long project there with a young athlete to try and get him up?
Absolutely. We have only ever seen 8 kilos over a year, 8 to 9 kilos maximum over a year of muscle gain. I don't know, Gilly, if you want to allude to that anymore, but I don't think we've seen much more than that. I don't think the body physically, in terms of adaptation and things, what would be real in that space.
Yeah, I think like sometimes you get more weight gain, but it's crap weight if you go any faster than that, right? So that's why you heard Kat say muscle mass gain. A lot of people will put on weight very quickly, but generally it's poor weight because again, nutrition isn't lined up with training, and so yeah, it's easy to put on bad weight, but good weight. Yeah, you're probably looking at, yeah, you're going to be lucky to put on 500 or 600 grams of lean muscle a month. You'd be doing things well to be hitting sort of a muscle gain of 5 to 8 kilos in a year. You'd be doing pretty well. Depends on age as well, though. Like I think like Kat used an example at the start around Sammy Whitelock. When he first became an All Black, he was only 108 kilograms and he was young. And we know that these athletes, they're still growing. Your body's competing, with energy demands around growth versus lean mass gain. And so that's why diet or nutrition changes over time, because what's happening in your body changes over time. So young athletes with low training age and poor nutrition, you can realize changes really, really fast in muscle mass with a reasonable weights program and better nutrition. But obviously, as you get a bit older, you know, you get to my age, it's pretty hard to put on any muscle at any point in time. You know, but you get a 19-year-old male, and holy heck, they just, some of them just have, some of them, even cultural differences, you know, some people just, we've got a couple of athletes we work with at the moment that honestly, they could have a piece of steak in their hand, they could walk into a gym, look at the weights, eat the steak, and leave, and they'd put on 2 kilos of lean muscle. You know, like it's just phenomenal. Some of these specimens, and then you've got other people that would have to stick to a really intense hypertrophy program, be hitting their protein targets, you know, 5 times a day, and you know they're putting on a kilo of lean mass in 4 months. You know, so everyone's a little bit different, which is what Kat opened up with, which is gold.
I think too, one of the things that you will, if you're dealing with young teenage athletes, those who have just left school and academies and things like that, the challenge you'll have is parent and coach expectation. So the biggest thing is everyone wants them to put on weight. They're going, oh, you know, you're a hooker, you should be, or you're prop, you need to put on 10 kilos. And I was constantly having to work with this when I worked with the lower grades and even through schools. And the thing you have to remember is these kids are going through puberty, okay? You cannot accelerate that. You cannot make the muscle development of puberty and progression go any faster than what nature is going to design. So you will have early developers who at 17, 18 are big, bulky, where a coach or a parent would like that player to be. Then you've got others who will be 24, 25 before they reach their maturity. Okay. And so for some of those big boys, and again, the locks are classic examples, that's often the age where they get to that weight and muscle mass and physical maturity is not till later. And so you can't at 18 expect that person to be where they need to be at 25. So we have to be realistic that we're not putting these expectations on kids. Yes, you can teach them, and what I say is let's eat well so that when your body is ready to grow, it's got everything it needs. But it is really difficult to actually put on mass regardless of how much you eat if your body's not ready maturity enough to do it. So we need to consider that when we're working with some of these athletes as well, and be knowing with coaching that this will happen, and we'll do everything outside it that we can to help, but it's not going to be something that we can force if the body's not ready to mature and do that. And I'm sure, Gilly, you've worked with athletes where you've seen that happening over the years as well.
Yeah, like I was saying, like it's sometimes you're competing, you know, like and you just have to be patient. Often, you know, we're in a rush to put on lean mass, and actually we have to just wait for nature to do its thing, and for puberty and the growth to finish before we can then add on layers of muscle. So patience is important, and like I said, you know, you can find lots of young athletes will boost their calorie intake and maybe boost how hard they train, but a lot of them will be eating poorly and put on poor mass, you know, and so you sort of just, yeah, can't reiterate it enough, you know, be patient, but also understand individuals are all different. Even the landscape at home, you know, like some families can provide really good nutrition and some can't. So that impacts on what sort of quality of mass gain can occur.
Absolutely. Okay, so really amongst all of that is coming back, and I keep coming back to the fact that we also have to provide for good health, because, and I get that's something that we're really strong around in our medical team, with Gilly and that as well, is that we're providing performance but through health. So we always need to make sure that we're helping our athletes be healthy, and also it's something Gilly and I have talked about over the years, is having a responsibility to what our athletes are going to do after they retire and the impact their nutrition is having on their family. And that's one of the biggest things players have fed back, is once they start having families, is they realize nutrition actually plays a massive role in their young children as well, and they want to be role models. So it's really important that we look at that factor as well. So it's making sure we get the fruits. I mean, you've all heard the 5+ a day, the fruit, the vegetables, the grains, the dairy, the meat, chicken, fish, nuts, seeds, all real food. So we're getting variety. And in terms of fruit and veg and carbohydrates, some of the new work coming out saying you should be trying to eat 30 different varieties of plant foods a week. I think I'm at like 18 or 20, but and really challenging yourself to think, because we get so routine around the foods that we choose because it works. It's easy. Great, I'll take this each day. This is what I'm going to eat. But actually challenge yourself around nutrient distribution, getting a variety, and I'll talk about gut health soon as well, is that trying to get up to that 30 a day can be quite challenging, but actually what they're suggesting we do try to do. So let's take a look at what that looks like on the plate. This is just 3, but I'm sure some of you might have seen these before they've been used. So again, it's individualizing the athlete, but also the training load that they've got. So yes, I've touched on grams per kilo of body weight, but in many cases that doesn't mean anything to the athlete. So having a visual, and I've actually plated meals up on a plate and shown an athlete, or gone to a buffet with them, asked them to serve it and to discuss with me why they're putting different things in different portions on their plate. But obviously to the left there is a light training day, rest day for some people. It might be half a plate of veg. And this is probably the key plate that I will use for people trying to lose body fat who don't have very high energy needs. Sometimes a prop will be using this type of plate more often than, say, someone like a Damien McKenzie who would never. And so it's a really good visual. And so you fill the plate up first with the vegetables, and then you've got your protein, and then you've got your carbohydrate. But again, carbohydrate, as you can see, the biggest variable here is your carbohydrate. So for a moderate training, so we call this your performance plate, most used often is the third. And so that tends to meet most of the targets for a player, and then adding in little bits of fat, and then like a pre-match meal, or for more endurance athletes, depending on their needs, would have a bigger half plate of carbohydrate and less protein and fruit and fats and fruits and vegetables if you're leading into a competition or a game. Any questions around those plates there? As I say, just
a
makes
quick one from me, if that's all right. So the vegetable sections look very different on those plates for me, and I realise that there's different loads in different vegetables, and I think that's one of the most confusing parts for me always, is that if it's green, it's good, maybe not so much. Is there more how do we manage vegetable load in that whole scenario?
Yeah, so I think you've really hit it on the head, is that the difference and change here really is the carbohydrates and the vegetables. Obviously, for someone who doesn't need so much carbohydrate, you can really maximize the vegetables there as a filler and also getting your rainbow. For someone who is in the moderate, a third of the plate is actually adequate. That's about 2 cups of vegetables. But obviously the one on the hard side, that's not something I would recommend people eating that's probably more what some people might be eating, but it's not what I would be recommending as a daily meal for lunch and dinner. It's more, unless they're training particularly hard, but more for a pre-competition. So yes, we need the one on the left, the light, is actually really overdoing the vegetables, to be fair, but it's actually helping fill a gap. Because if you took those vegetables out, you've only got half a plate of food, and your natural inclination is to have a full plate of food. So you would fill up more carbs and more protein if you didn't have vegetables. So by filling up first with vegetables, it reduces the space on your plate as well for carbohydrates and protein. Did that answer your question? I'm not sure I've answered your question. Okay, so as I say, you can see the variation there is carbohydrate, and the thing that suffers for the extra carbohydrate is the vegetables. But you're very welcome, if you want to eat the hard dish there, you could actually put that much vegetables from the left on that plate. There is no reason why you can't do that. As long as you've still got the same amount of carbohydrate and protein, you can put as much. In fact, some of the players will fill vegetables up in a bowl and have it additional to their plate. So we can actually keep the vegetables static in that quantity, you know, 2 or 3 good cups for each of those 3 meals, but you'd have to have it in a bowl separate to that plate. So you still get enough protein and carbohydrate. I'm not sure if I'm explaining that right.
No, you are. That's helpful.
Can I jump in and just throw 5 cents in there just to your question, Andy? Like, you're right. Like, it's actually a hard thing to probably educate particularly young people on. But what I like is, to me, there's two key phrases I like to use, which is color is king, which is, or eat a rainbow. So as long as you're getting plenty of color, then can't really go wrong. But also that difference which Kat was alluding to around carbohydrate content of the different vegetables or the vegetables in the salads. If you actually have a look at what's in stuff, the greater, the brighter the color, the more nutrient dense and the lower the energy or carbohydrate load. But I think also for me, what you can easily separate is, and there's a couple of outliers here, but below the ground versus above the ground. Above the ground, everything's really colorful and nutrient dense. Below the ground, there is a bit of color, but it's really carbohydrate, energy dense. You think about your potatoes, your kumara, or what do you guys call it, sweet potato, carrots, beetroot. Whilst there's a bit of color coming in from beetroot and carrot, generally the energy load is higher, the nutrient load is lower. But you go above the ground, it's the opposite, lower energy but higher nutrient. So if you're wanting to get the balance right, which is what those plates show you, is if you're wanting to have a bigger energy intake, then you're adding in some of that carbohydrate, vegetable, potatoes, etc., a bit more than just salads and color.
Your training load. Yeah, so that's just, so I obviously missed the part of the question. So you were saying that you get confused about vegetables because some of them are actually carbohydrate dense. And so, as Gilly said, underground, so any starchy, kumara, parsnip, yams, potato are your key ones that are considered as carbohydrate. So when you put your potatoes or your kumara on your plate, they don't count as your green vegetable mix, or what we call free vegetables. And those you can eat a variety of different colours, and you should be trying to choose 2 or 3 different colours at each meal. Okay.
Hey, Kat, just before we move to the next one, Henry had a question around meal timing. So how far in advance should you eat the pre-match meal?
That's a very good question. Most research will tell us, Gilly, most research will tell us 4 hours is your most substantial meal before competing. Obviously, if you are an athlete that has to do a morning event, that's not going to work. So you can have a lighter breakfast, but have something the night before. If it's a lunchtime event, your breakfast is your last big meal. And then, so basically 4 hours before whatever time it is your big meal. We've created a window so that players can, we recommend 4 hours, but some find that they need a little bit more than that or a little bit less. And so it's a matter of if it's too far out, like 5 hours, you're going to need another snack. And in most cases, you should have another snack 2 hours before your competition, which might be a banana and a bun, or it might be a tin of creamed rice. It might be a small sandwich. It might be your banana with a squeeze of peanut butter, whatever works and stays down for you, really.
Yeah, hopefully that helps you, Henry.
Nice. So The next one, as I kept alluding to, is one of the key things around making sure that nutrition works for us and the food that we're eating is going to get its maximum benefit in the body. It's having a gut that actually knows how to process the food that we're eating. And so we talk about nurturing the gut in a way that keeps us healthy, because they've found that, you know, a very, very large percentage of our immune system and just the way that our body functions actually comes from the gut. They talk about that gut feeling. And so we now know that nutrition, what we eat, actually plays a massive role in the makeup of your gut. And if you think of your gut as being like a forest, I guess, and so there's flowers and there's trees and there's also weeds. And so weeds are what we call the sort of the bacteria or the micronutrient, the microbiotics that aren't actually that good for us. But we want to encourage the trees and the flowers to grow and keep the weeds at bay. So nurturing the gut means that this garden in our gut of all this bacteria is actually optimizing at its best. And so what you can see here is there's quite a lot of things that actually get that flora or garden out of balance. So things like just having an infection or illness. As we get older, we tend to have a slightly out of balance gut, large amounts or even any alcohol, high sugar diet. So bad bugs or those weeds love sugar. They thrive on sugar. They also thrive more on high saturated, high fat diets. Also, I mean, we've all heard of antibiotics cleaning out the good bacteria as well as the bad. Smoking, medications, parasites, stress, and interestingly enough, lack of sleep. So a couple of nights of poor sleep can actually change the balance of the weeds and the flowers and the trees. And so weeds tend to become more prolific when we are sleeping poorly. So we need to understand how the foods that we eat can actually help sustain and really make sure that our gut is functioning at its best. And so what we know, and you're all very much aware, is probiotics. And so they are essentially what's in our gut, and there's thousands and thousands of different strains. They still don't really understand what makes it the ultimate gut, but by taking a wide-ranging probiotic each day, that will definitely help with setting up a good microflora in your gut. But we can also eat foods that are going to encourage that. So things like miso, it's fantastic, Greek yogurt, kefir drinks, kombucha, soy sauce. Try and use a lower salt soy sauce because it can be quite salty. And then obviously fermented vegetables like sauerkraut. And they actually recommend you try and use 1 or 2 of these each a day, which for many people, soy sauce is actually a natural part of their cooking. Greek yogurt is obviously some people's go-to for breakfast or in smoothies. Just beware of kombucha. Some of them are really just commercial drinks. So you need to make sure you've got a genuine kombucha drink. Some people make their own. Has anyone tried to make kombucha themselves? No, I haven't yet either, because you need a good bug and you need to be around a bit more than what I am. But definitely have made homemade yogurt. The fermented vegetables are pretty easy to be able to make yourself as well. And then in amongst that, you've got your apple cider vinegar can be helpful with that, and also lemon juice can help activate those probiotics as well. What we now know is that we can actually feed those probiotics with food. So these are prebiotics. So these are foods that the probiotics eat off in our gut. So not only do these foods provide nutrients to the body, they're actually providing fuel to all the microbes, all the good microbes in our gut. So things like all your obviously Greek yogurt comes under this again, but all your berries are amazing. Pretty much all your fruit and vegetables are gold. Garlic and onions are one of the top providers of prebiotics to the gut. And so I really encourage people where they can to be able to use onions and garlic in their cooking, because that's really going to help with setting up a good gut. Obviously be aware that some people can't tolerate those sorts of foods. So it's just if you're on a FODMAPs type diet, then that can make that quite difficult. Bananas are excellent. And actually the greener the bananas, the more prebiotic food they have in them. So as they ripen, they tend to lose the concentration of prebiotic food. So it takes a bit of getting used to using more of a green banana, but certainly provides some really good starches around that. Any sort of grainy bread, so rye or whole grain breads are going to provide that. I love like Vogels or Bergen are just gold bread. So any sort of bread like that. And then you've got your legumes and your nuts and seeds and your rolled oats. So what you'll find interesting is that these foods are also primarily carbohydrate foods. So you can double up here, and that's why it's important that we get enough carbohydrate so that we can provide our gut with the prebiotics that it needs. And so these foods are also really high in fiber. So we should be trying to get a minimum of 30 grams of fiber a day. That is what the gut needs. And if you try and eat those 30 different types of plant-based foods over the week, that'll go a long way towards getting that 30 grams. With our athletes, so that's 30 grams per about 2,000 calories. So if you're an athlete eating 6,000 calories, we will find some of our boys eating between 60 to 70 grams of fiber a day. And they genuinely need that to nurture the gut that's processing that high calorie load of food. And so that's where it becomes hard when you've got someone who's trying to reduce carbohydrate, particularly for health or for different weight management reasons, is we still need to try and factor these foods in to make sure that they can ensure that their gut is working and functioning as it can to process the food, to get all the nutrients and provide a strong immune system. So again, these foods are really easy to find, but really vital to being used each day. Has anyone got any questions around pro and prebiotics?
Just to circle back a little bit, you mentioned earlier when we were talking about gaining mass and speaking on protein, Kelly had a question. Do you find that stress impacts muscle growth? And this could be like emotional and or physical stress?
Absolutely, because it changes your hormone profiles and it will change your sleep. And so the capacity to put on muscle mass can be affected by raised cortisol primarily. Gilly can probably talk a bit more to that around the science behind it, but from what I've seen, absolutely.
I got a quick question. How do you find 30 grams of protein or fiber, I should say? Like it's not 30-gram banana, it's something be tiny, you know, like
A banana's got about 2 or 3 grams, so you need about 10 bananas a day. No,
yeah,
it's
so
easy to
You gotta
mix
eat a
up. Like if
bunch,
you have a
mate.
couple
You
of
gotta eat a
pieces
bunch of
of
bananas, Brian, like
Yeah.
a monkey, mate. There you go.
yeah, so I always wonder, you know, when you say you got to eat this many grams out of the food, but how do you actually find how many grams are actually in
Tell you
that
what,
food?
yeah, so what's a really good thing is something like an app on your phone. Is really good, like MyFitnessPal. There's some different ones that here. MyFitnessPal is actually pretty good. And if you just track what you eat in a day, and it will track your fiber, and it will tell you how much fiber you're using. So that's probably the easiest way to understand whether you're getting enough fiber. Fiber is just so important to keeping a regular bowel movement. And that was fascinating was when these players started adding nuts and seeds into their diet. Just a small handful was enough to get things moving. It also provides your body, obviously, as I've mentioned, with these prebiotics, but it also helps with heart health because it helps absorb the less saturated fat and cholesterol gets absorbed by the body when you've got a higher fiber diet. And that's one of the primary dietary changes they'll suggest if you've got an elevated cholesterol, is to get more plant foods in. And it's not because of animal fats, it's because you're wanting to try and get more fiber. And that just keeps things moving and absorbs some of those fats and the toxins that can potentially be in our food. In fact, I was reading a study, and it was a Chinese study where they monitored people's bowel movements because if you weren't going once a day, they believed that the buildup of toxins in your body was really detrimental to your health. And so they were trying to, modify diet so that you were pooping every day, but also providing psyllium or different bulking fibers that help you pass every day. I mean, and again, that's a genetic thing. We're all different. Some people poop 3 or 4 times a day, and others every 2 or 3 days. So it's knowing what is regular for you, but an ideal is once a day. And these foods can definitely make a difference for most people in that space. Okay. So let's touch on the performance zone that we were talking about. We're talking about what we eat before, during, and after. So this is a bit more about the performance area that we're talking about. So with breakfast or the meal pre-competition or game, I try to get athletes to eat about 100 grams of carbohydrates. So that's enough. That's usually about 1 gram per kilo of body weight. And so it's roughly around about that 100 grams. So most of our players, when they eat breakfast, are aiming for that 100 grams of carbohydrate because we've got training in the morning. So if it's your lunch that you've got a training in the afternoon, you might want to split it over lunch and afternoon, but primarily in those 3 or 4 hours beforehand, you need about 100 grams of carbohydrate. Then you can have a top up 3 or 4 hours, or sorry, 1 or 2 hours beforehand, depending on what you can tolerate in your stomach. And again, it might only be 50 grams of carbohydrate, and it does depend on what you can tolerate in that hour beforehand. Most pre-workouts don't have any carbohydrate, but most of our guys will have a squeezy gel, and we have a drink made up. So most of our guys will be getting about 40 to 50 grams of carbohydrate in that hour before the warm-up. You may have heard people talking about a rebound situation where you have a small amount of carbs and you get a rebound effect of insulin acting just before you go out and exercise that can then be detrimental to the performance in those first sort of 10, 20, 30 minutes. But actually what they found, there was only one ever study that showed that. And with the players that have worn blood glucose monitors, we've never ever seen a rebound effect by taking carbohydrate in that hour before you start a performance of either training or a game. And I usually, as I say, I usually try to get a minimum of 30 grams where I can, because if you're going out there for a couple of hours, you need to be trying to get in 30 to 60 grams of carbs per hour of exercise that you're doing for rugby. And that can be quite difficult to get stops in play and stops in training to get that amount. So if you start off with 30 grams or 40 grams immediately before, that can help. That means you only need another 20 or 30 during the training, and then it becomes around what you have afterwards. Obviously, it's not as intense as an endurance where you're getting up to 90 to 120 grams. I think, Gilly, what did you say? What did you say you managed to get with your endurance when you were racing? How much you got up to?
Yeah, I'm chucking in about 150 grams an hour at the moment. Yeah. Which is a lot. Like, it's hard to get that in. You're just sort of having really concentrated drinks and things. Yeah, but if you don't, you fall over after about 5 or 6 hours. Yeah.
And the thing is, so for rugby, obviously you're not out there for 4 or 5 hours, but and one of the big questions players will say to you is, oh my God, I'm having sugars, because you've educated them on not to eat too much sugar. So it's educating players that this is the right time to have sugar. And then the other thing is, if you don't eat during an extended training period of more than an hour, you will find that you will crave food later. You will feel much tireder later. And if you've got a gym session or another training session after that longer training session, you will find the energy reserves are a lot lower. So you've got to use this opportunity during training to get in carbohydrate. Has anyone had experience with working around carbs before and during training sessions?
I've only used them. So for me, like a powerlifting competition is it's quite drawn out because you have an event, then you got to rest and then warm up and repeat. So for me, I've been trying to learn how to use them for a meet and not doing it like everyone else. Like, you'll see generally most people just literally eat candy the whole time, but I find my stomach gets quite upset. So it's I'm in a cool learning curve with how to use them for my sport.
Absolutely.
I think Bucky, that's a really good point that you're on a learning curve. I think, you know, and Kat's really good at this, but experimenting with how you feel and how it impacts you, um, is really important. You know, so experiment away from things that matter. So experiment during trainings. You know, it's quite bizarre, isn't it? Like you think back to, and I'm showing my age here, but I think back to when I played footy as a young kid. You know, it was bags of cut up oranges at half time. You know, and little did we know that that was actually, you know, mums and dads giving the kids a little bit of sugar to get through the next half of the footy, and it's sort of gone away from the natural supply of sugar to something that's a bit more convenient and processed, but the theory hasn't changed, the impact and the application hasn't changed. I think it's really important if you know, especially if you're demanding intensity in a session from yourself or from athletes, if there's enough intensity, then you do need to be fueling. You know, you're playing a game, you know, and a game like I'm just doing some stuff at the moment. You know, the average game at the moment is going for 108 minutes. You know, it's 2 hours. Um, and if there's, you know, if 40 minutes of that is high intensity, you're needing some sugars, you're needing some glycogen, at some point, and everyone will be different. So where you experiment with that again, which is what we do, is we'll fuel in sessions and training sessions, and people will try and they'll get to see it, and you'll see athletes some days reach for some fuel, and other days say, "No, I'm good." And that's them feeling like they've got a feeling of their fuel tank, you know, and that's sort of what you're trying to teach people, is you're trying to get them to understand, one, what it feels like when you don't have fuel on board, but two, what it feels like when you do. And so then being able to sort of either plan or adapt and adjust based on how you're feeling. Obviously, we don't want to feel underfueled before we have some. We sort of want to plan for it, but you don't run your gas. You know, Brian's a pilot, flies jets around the world, right? You don't run your jet to empty before you put fuel into it. Otherwise, you crash, right? You sort of like, okay, it's starting to get a bit low. You need to put some fuel in. Our bodies are exactly the same.
Absolutely. And look, we've got players who will have their squeezy gel because it feels uncomfortable in their tummy. They'll put their 60 grams in, even more, right before training because they know that it doesn't work so well for them during. I've got some who use bananas, and that'll be their refuel halfway through. But it is trying, like you say, being on a journey is great. And I'm on a journey with the players all the time. And Gilly and his, you know, all of us in our area trying to work to maximise and help the player the best that we can. In that space. And so you've obviously got sports drink that you can use as top-ups as well. That's a very easy sort of sipping way to be able to get those carbohydrates as well as your electrolytes and your hydration in that space. I think the biggest area around carbohydrate and growth that we've had probably over the last few years is around that post-exercise. So what we've found using blood glucose monitors is you really need to target that 100 grams of carbs after an intense session in that first 30 minutes, and getting that 30 to 40 grams of protein with your leucine hit in there as well. What we found with a number of players, that if they didn't get that carb hit in that first 30 minutes, their blood glucose dropped really low and quite considerably low. And it took sometimes 12 to 24 hours for their body to recover and maintain normal blood glucose levels. So we were seeing lows overnight when they hadn't hit those targets post-training, because they couldn't quite make it up. Even if they were going back and having lunch, having an afternoon snack, often they would have a gym session again or another session in the afternoon, even if they ate in the evening. And again, eating in the evening did make quite a difference, but we were seeing significant lows overnight if they didn't target that post-exercise time frame and got enough carbs in. And again, everyone's different. And I've got one athlete who said, look, I just can't eat that food before, during, and after as much as you want me to, but I'm going to spend from 5 p.m. to 10 p.m. topping that all up. And that was what worked best. That's what best. It's not ideal in my head, but it works best for him. And he was getting good results, but he really had to focus on getting those carbs in. And so it was quite an eye-opener when I started using the blood glucose monitors. And for us in the All Blacks, it's actually pretty easy. The food's all there. The challenge you have, and we have in Super Rugby, is that most of the time you're relying on the player to provide that food. Now, if they're not organised, or they've got something else to go to, or they're going home to have their next meal, but that gets dragged out by an hour because they're doing a few jobs on the way home, or they go home to kids, or they've got other commitments, and that you don't get those carbs in, it impacts. And if you're doing that for 5 to 6 weeks, you can start falling off the rails because you're just not getting enough calories and enough carbs over a period of time. And each week it just gets incremental, and then all of a sudden, bang, you're in a heap. And so it is important to try and make sure that that really is targeted in that post-exercise area. Has anyone got any questions around that?
Go for it, Andy.
Yeah, thanks, Kat. And this is great information. It's awesome. It'd be really good if we could get this in some sort of plan as to how because all of this stuff is gold for me. But then trying to map out the week and the day with different athletes is going to be quite difficult. I was just wondering whether
I've got a bit of an example coming up, so we can go through that in a bit of detail, what that looks like.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Right. So ideal recovery foods, they're pretty easy, to be honest. I mean, if you generally are going home the next meal, but chocolate milk is an easy fix. And that if you've got 60 mils of chocolate milk, that's going to give you your 30 grams of protein in New Zealand. The milk, there's some different varieties of milk, but just check the milk that you're using, and then you just top that up with a banana. The small 1 square meals are gold. If you're going home, you can have cereal. There's so many different options of foods that you can use if you've got access to having a protein shake straight away. We have a protein shake, and then we'll top up with 2 foods. Protein shake provides 60 grams for the one I make, and then they'll take 2 more options which provide 20 grams each. So it might be a 1 square meal, it might be a banana, it might be creamed rice, and there's lots of different options, some scroggin, different options of things that you can use in the recovery phase there. But it's all about that planning. I'm just going to skip through, so I'm conscious of time too. Fluids, we all know about fluids. Really, it is about pushing the water, cut out the sugary drinks. Really, they're just empty calories. They're not providing you with any extra nutrition, but they're things that often players crave for. In COVID, it really became evident where people had to do supermarket shops that were delivered to our hotel, and there were just boxes of fizzy drink. And in many cases, it was the diet option, but it's still not helping you reduce the amount of sugar load. I'm not going to get into conversation around sugar versus dietary sugars because that's just a very big conversation. But to be fair, there's no dietary sugars, artificial sugars, have been shown to mess with your gut bacteria. That's all I can say. Still out there as to how much of an impact it has and how much you need to have, but there is the potential that it can mess with your gut bacteria. So really just making sure you're hydrated. We know that colour of your pee, we know that if you weigh yourself before and after, that you're going to get an idea of how much you're using. Everyone sweats at different rates. Has anyone got any particular questions they want to talk about around the water?
Brian, got a quick question on adding salt or electrolytes to your drinks, on active days or even on recovery days.
Yeah, it can be. You can actually make your own sports drink with like a Raro. I don't know if you've got a powdered cordial drink that you have. We have Raro over here, which you make 2/3 of a drink to 1/3 water in your bottle, and then you add a couple of pinches of salt, and that's almost enough. A lot of our schools use that instead of buying expensive sports drinks. But yes, you can definitely add salt.
Brian, is that to replace that drop of sweat you got on your nose the other day?
Yeah.
Well, I think the just throwing in there again something, Kat, like I think we used to measure body weight change before and after games and trainings to try and educate athletes on fluid and glycogen loss, to try and show people everyone sweats differently. The rate or the volume that you lose is something we can all find out pretty easily with a pre and post sort of check-in. And in terms of the electrolyte, losses, it's probably more a matter of a range of electrolyte intakes based on the volume of water you're losing or sweat you're losing. Again, we'll all lose a different amount of electrolyte based on probably the intensity, but our physiology. So it's a little bit harder to determine unless you're measuring it directly through a patch or something. But for most of us, the best way to get to teach young kids, young athletes is weigh in pre and post a session and go, oh wow, actually I lose 2 kilos in a game. Okay, I need to make sure that I'm hydrating a bit more than I have been. You're never going to probably get 2 liters in, but it just gives people a little bit of a reminder. What's the most you've seen lost in a game, Kat?
I have seen 8 kilos lost in a game.
Yeah, me too. I've seen 7.5. Marty Hollow who was a number 7 for the Chiefs. So that he was losing, like, he was only 101 kilos. So, he's losing like 8% body weight in 2
And so,
hours.
yeah. And so
That's a sweaty man.
well, I had Byron Callagher, who was our halfback. That was when I was with the Highlanders, and they played the Brumbies at a pre-season game, and it was like 30 degrees in Oamaru of all places. And we were weighing them before and after, and we were absolutely horrified. And he was almost vomiting because he'd lost so much. He was quite dehydrated. But it was a good, okay, it wasn't ideal that he got to that in that situation, but it actually taught us. And I still remember, Gilly, in Japan when we went to the World Cup, one of the first training sessions we had there, and it was still in their very high temperatures. And I think we went through 150 litres of water alone at one training session for 30 people. So they were drinking massive amounts of water just to try and keep on top of it, sweating. We had ice baths and pools and for them to jump in straight away because it was so hot. But it is the hotter it is, obviously. Look, a lot of the temperatures we play rugby in, you might only get 1 or 2 kilos of weight loss, which is manageable. But it still can be preventable. It's easy to push the water, and if you need a sports drink to top up your carbs, then that's an easy way to do that during a session. I think kids are a lot more aware these days. They tend to all carry water bottles with them everywhere now. So it's certainly getting easier in that state. Okay, I said I'd obviously touch on sleep. Sleep, I call it, it's almost like a nutrient, because the body doesn't function metabolically well if you don't get enough sleep. And so we absolutely need to encourage sleep to be part of our athlete routine. And so if you've got young athletes, any athlete should be getting around about 9 hours. Now they're just, in most, if not 10. And the study's shown the quality of cognition and skills is reduced when you get less sleep. I guess the challenge we have is being on the road. With us, we have jet lag and all sorts of changing hotels and beds and things like that. But if you're dealing with people who've got busy families or young kids who have got some work they've got to study for, there's so many different reasons why we don't get enough sleep. But what you'll know, if you have had a time period where you've had 2 or 3 or 2 nights in a row of poor sleep, I get it even after 1 night, is you start to crave sugary junk food. And it's nature's way of the metabolism has changed. You've got more of the hormones that encourage you to eat, to keep your brain awake and to keep you to be able to do the things that you do. And so for an athlete, even if they've we're looking into things like sleep problems and sleep apnea and the impact that can have on long-term things like diabetes, obesity, and that sort of thing are massive, because the metabolism changes when your sleep is not restful and getting the amount that you need. So really make sure that that's part of a conversation when you're talking around nutrition, because it can impact what people eat. I'm going to touch on supplements again. It's always, as we always talk about it, being icing on the cake. There are genuinely supplements that work. You've got things like creatine that absolutely genuinely works. At the moment, we have a policy where we don't introduce supplements. I don't even think we have it in the under 20s yet. For example, creatine, because it generally works. And if you've got a growing body and you've got muscle development, then you can develop. It can be associated with injuries and things like that if you've got too many gains around muscle mass too quickly, potentially. But it's also, if you take I guess the culture away from real food and start looking at supplements, then that becomes your reliance. And so we need to make sure we still make our focus around real food. Whey protein really is a convenience food. It's a really good way of getting in protein when you're a busy person. Caffeine absolutely works. I probably wouldn't be using it on your school kids or young kids, but definitely works, because then the conversation you have around caffeine is its impact on sleep. So there's a relationship there as well. And obviously that alludes to your pre-workouts that contain the creatine and the caffeine. So those would be the only real supplements that I think are performance enhancing that don't cost a lot of money. Then you open up a whole channel around there's massive amounts of other supplements that we can be using. I guess the key thing for us is we need to have tested supplements. But supplements need to be monitored and used in a protected environment, not just free willy. And they need to understand what they're using. Does anyone want to comment around the role of supplements they've had or experiences they've had in their environments?
Yeah, I think with our athletes, Kat, at Rugby Ready, a lot of the times we'll ask these questions about vegetable intake. We'll ask about protein intake, because they're at, hey, what pre-workout should I take? How much creatine should I be taking? So we'll look at sleep and basics of nutrition and educate them around nailing that first, because it can be such and also cost. If somebody's having an issue affording groceries, but then they're willing to spend, $200 or $300 a month on supplements, you can again educate them on, hey, well, maybe you could invest that in colorful food and maybe better quality meats instead.
Absolutely. But the problem is for teenagers, and I know this because I've had a boarding hostel manager ring me, he was horrified at the range of supplements that teenage boys at a boarding school, are using, for all sports, not just rugby, but all sports, because they believe that is going to be the difference for them. And they eat like crap, but this is going to be the difference for them. So there really is a really strong education piece here, unfortunately, around helping people understand that nutrition from real food is your edge, not the supplements. Yeah. So
Yes.
again, it's a growing space.
Yes, ma'am. I have seen a similar incident like in the previous football academy, because they chase the senior athletes, and they want to get bigger, they want to get stronger, and so they look for these supplements, like a little bit shortcuts, and it's particularly creatine. Like they really wanted, like, when we can take, how much we can take it, and when they gain a little bit strength, and then they start, other people start chasing them. So it's a kind of very hard to control as well. Sometimes they do
Absolutely.
behind, even if we tell them, like, let finish this cycle and then we will think about this, but they are a little bit restless.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's, as I say, there's so much out there now. And I guess for us, we're lucky that our players can only use tested supplements, so we know they're clean. Whereas what the kids and people who are trying to look for a bargain and online, the products that, there's so much research around testing products, because you only need to list an ingredient on the ingredient list if it's above a threshold. Now, a lot of companies will put products that are banned, but in there below the threshold, just below the threshold, so they don't have to list it. So you could buy even some of the whey proteins you can buy, and they can be full of so much, I'm going to say crap here, without it being listed, because they just come below the threshold. But companies that have done big testings on them have actually found all these products are in there, these ingredients are in there, but we don't know they're there. And so that's why it's so important that we use batch tested products, because they will pick up their threshold is very, very low, well, 0 basically. And so they will pick up if any of those nutrients are in there. So we do have to be very careful.
Kat, are you able to share which supplement brands the All Blacks use that are tested?
Absolutely. So we use Elite Health Span. That's our primary source of supplements. Purely, well, firstly, I worked with them way back in the day. They're a fabulous bespoke company. There's a lot of science behind their products, and they batch test everything. So we knew that we were getting a really good product. Masashi has now come on board and batch test a lot of their products, so we use quite a bit of theirs. And then there's other things, Science and Sport. They're probably more over you. There's some more European Science and Sport. We're struggling since COVID to get quick delivery to New Zealand, so we're sort of limiting the number of companies that we use. There's a really good company in Australia called True. We use another company here in New Zealand called Pure for whey protein that's tested. But our primary one is Elite Health Span and Masashi are the primary ones that we use. There's another one we've just started into is called Pillar Nutrition or Pillar Supplements, PILLAR. And they've got quite a good range as well. And you can get all of those online.
What does creatine do?
Creatine is like your high-end fuel. So carbohydrate is your fuel for high-intensity exercise. But when you've got very limited oxygen, like you're doing repeated sprints or lifting heavy weights repeatedly, the body cannot access carbohydrates quick enough. So creatine, through the role of ATP, produces a very fast, quick fuel. So it means that you can train at repeated speeds a lot longer, do more repetition for weights. And so for fitness and mass gain, it can be absolutely gold because you train harder for longer. So it's your high-end fuel that the body can use. We naturally get creatine from meats that we eat, but we can stack it and load it into our system. That means we have another fuel source that we can use for high-end. Interesting. Yeah.
So is it true with creatine, I heard this, that you're only meant to take it for like 6 weeks and then stop for 6 weeks to let the body come back down to a natural process?
Oh, look, you'll hear different things. As far as I know, the research recently shows that you don't actually have to be doing that. As long if you're taking 5 grams a day, if you loaded and kept loading, then yes. But if you're loading and then taking 5 grams a day or consistently taking 5 grams a day, some people only need 3, then it doesn't appear to be a problem. In fact, oh, you got a little person. In fact, the latest research is suggesting as we age, creatine is actually, once you get over 50, creatine is actually really, really important for brain health. Not that I've started it yet, but that it can be something that we can use as a supplement as we age to help with. And obviously that then tips over into brain health of rugby players, because creatine has been suggested to reduce the effect of concussion and return from concussion. And so we have as many athletes as we can on creatine for that reason as well.
Hey team, let's give a huge thank you to Kat. This has been a massively informative talk. There's so many awesome learnings from this, and we want to be really respectful of your time. So thank you so much for sharing your time today with us and your education. And if anyone on this call or watching the recording has questions, you can send them through to us, and we'll forward them on to Kat, and hopefully she can provide even more insights. So thank you again. This has been amazing today. Awesome.
Thanks,
No
Kat.
problem.
You're an
Tyler, I
absolutely.
think someone in your group was looking for a sort of a timed, periodized plan for a day. Just to top up, just to finish off, I just wanted to say the research that we have done with our athletes suggests that before they get out of bed, most of our players need 3,000 calories. So that's before they do anything, before any of their NEAT. Then we add, then on a single training day, they need about 4,000 calories. And then on double training day, they need between 5,000 to 6,000 calories, depending on the individual needs. So that's the sort of calorie load you're looking at, between 3,000 on a day off, up to 6,000 on a game day or a training day.
I think just to be careful there, team. The average size of the All Black forward is about, I don't know, average size 125 kilos. Okay, so you sort of need to keep that in mind. You're not going to go and tell these high school kids they need 6,000 calories a day. Okay,
Well,
end up.
some of them might. Yeah.
Some of them might.
Some of them might. So if you're looking at carbs, we're looking at somewhere between 4 to 6. Most of our players will eat 4 to 6 grams of carbs per kilo body weight on a training day. They will eat, as we mentioned, 2 to 3 grams of protein on most training days, even on a day off, and fat between 1 to 2 grams per kilo of body weight. So that gives you an idea of sort of what you're looking at in terms of grams per kilo of body weight, and then whatever that looks like. But I can send through to Gilly a plan of what a day might look like for an athlete and how that sort of factors in, if you like, to help give you some idea.
Yeah, that would be great. And we'll definitely share the resource with the group. All right.
Awesome. Okay,
Thank
guys,
you
lovely
so
to
much,
meet you
Kat.
all. Thank you. See you. Bye.
Hey.